Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today. Welcome to KANINI Connect. This is our monthly Connect session where we bring in industry and domain experts to kind of present and talk about the latest trends in the industry. So every month we pick a topic and we have these speakers to give us their thoughts, their experience, so we can learn from it as well as contribute to what we have learned as well in the process. So for this session today, I think our focus is going to be on vulnerability response management, and specifically how are we using ServiceNow to address these challenges, right? To talk about this, we have Todd Williams, Srini Kolathur, and Nilin. So I would like to start with brief introductions to them and their expertise. So um, Todd Williams is the CEO, Chief Operating Officer, and Vice President at the TEAK Group, and comes with overall 20 plus years of experience, and is the expert in the ServiceNow space. And he brings in a lot of knowledge in the IT governance and the compliance space. And he has expertise in implementing, building solutions. And as you see there, it's how in and how with ServiceNow. So Todd, thank you for joining us today and looking forward to hear from you. And Srini Kolathur has over 25 years of experience with compliance services. So data brackets, he heads up data brackets, which has experience supporting, leading, and managing the security, compliance, and risk assessment Fortune 100 companies. Srini, thank you for joining us today, and looking forward to hear from your industry
Thank you,
expertise
Raj.
there. And Lenin is the director of delivery in KANINI. So he has 25 plus years of experience running projects and delivering projects using ServiceNow. Obviously, brings a lot to the table in terms of how important vulnerability management is with respect to software development process. And Nilin, thank you for joining us today. So couple of things before we get into the fireside chat session. So here, this is a fireside chat session where we are going to focus on specific topics, and we are going to have few questions, and we're going to hear from Srini, Todd, and Nilin on different aspects of vulnerability response. So during this process, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A tab in the Zoom so that you can drop in your questions. And towards the end of this call, we are going to focus and address some of those questions. Todd and Srini and Nilin would be happy to take those questions for you today. All right. So with that, Srini, I think we'll start with talking about can you start with an overview of what is vulnerability management and why do you think it is important in the current world that we live?
Sure, Raj. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Maybe we'll take your question into two parts. First one is, what is vulnerability management and why vulnerability management is very important. Maybe we'll start the second part first, if it's okay, because why you need to do that. Definitely, vulnerability management is required to protect your critical information assets. The way I see that is just like how you will go for your annual physical exam or annual car inspection, right? No matter what, you're running certain systems and you want to make sure that, it's operating effectively, whether there are no vulnerabilities or not. So that's the way I see it. And here in the vulnerability management side, it's essentially going to be whether you're going to have kind of a continuous vulnerability management or like you're going to have intermittent or more frequent vulnerability management type of thing. So that's the only difference between your annual physical exam or annual car inspection, right? So that's the way I see it. But going back to the much deeper question, right, with respect to why it is required. So the first thing is many of your customers are demanding it. Why are they demanding it? because these days, like everything is integrated. Your customers sharing data with you using API, web service, and whatnot, and they want to make sure all your systems are protected, because if your systems are vulnerable, essentially, they people get access to your customer's environment as well using your system, right? It is the weakest link in the whole link. So that's the way they see it, and they are demanding it. That is number one. And second thing is, with all this regulatory compliance requirement, whether you take HIPAA, the New York cybersecurity law, or GDPR, or any of these ISO, SOC 2 type, all of them in one way or other, they are requesting for effective information risk management program. So effective information risk management program essentially starts with vulnerability management. So that is kind of another huge requirement that's driving companies to start thinking about vulnerability management more seriously, right? And third thing is, let's say something bad happens to your environment, and you go for an insurance claim. The first thing they are going to ask is, have you done your due diligence in terms of protecting the data? So you need to be able to provide the reports. You need to be able to provide a third-party audit report and stuff. If you're not able to provide that, then they are going to say you didn't maintain your systems properly. Then how could you even claim insurance for some of these damages, right? And lastly, I would say, with all the things that are going on, especially in this COVID economy, what is, first of all, COVID economy, right? So it's essentially, the way we see it is, a lot of remote workforce, right? Pretty much the entire workforce is remote now. And that means there is no physical boundaries in terms of where your data resides. And then you're all talking about a single point of failure in this whole chain, right? Those are like some of the things I think that is really driving why we all need to be thinking about vulnerability management more seriously, right? So, Raj, if I could take another minute or two to just give a bigger
Sure.
picture in terms of what is that we are talking about here, right? So all of you on this call, I know, like there's quite a few folks on the call, all of you must be managing or maintaining some sort of like customer data, your employee data, some kind of financial data that you are responsible for, and then like some kind of health data. So if you're managing any of this data, definitely you need to start thinking about vulnerability management, right? Because once you start collecting the data, like once you put that form up on your website that says enter your name, email ID, and maybe your some of their personal information, that means you're responsible for it. And so as a company, you're like the executives responsibility is to reduce the risk of the company. That is their number one responsibility. So that's why people need to be thinking about this vulnerability management more seriously, right? And lastly, we want to, I just want to emphasize what is really the cost of this vulnerability? Like, what is the cost of a data breach? So let's say you capture my information, my name, email ID, and whatnot, some additional information about my personal detail. And if you're not able to protect that properly, so it could cost the company approximately about $250 per record. So that's from one of the most reputed research organization, Verizon Data Breach, that reports the type of industries and the type of data breaches that are happening and stuff. So they are estimating anywhere from $200 to $300 per data record data breach, right? So just go back and think about how many number of record sets that you are maintaining. Let's say like maybe unique record set that you are maintaining about your customer or about your employee, about a lot of these things that we talked about now. So that is going to be the cost to your company if there is a data breach. So essentially that's the approach you want to take in terms of, okay, what is going to be the cost and how I can mitigate that risk, and what kind of things, that best practices that I need to follow, right? So that's
So
the
what
way.
are the,
Sorry.
so what are those top three issues that you think, according to you, what are the top three issues that you are seeing most in the market today, especially with the COVID?
Oh, yeah, sure, Raj. I think that's an excellent question. These vulnerabilities, I think, as you kind of alluding to, it changes very rapidly, especially in this COVID economy. This has changed a lot. So, number one, what we see is remote working is a big issue, right? So, how is this a big issue? Uh, Essentially, all your design, like whatever you're doing, company proprietary information, everything is not within your boundary anymore. And all the staff, like whether they are working out of your India office or out of any of your other global offices, or working from their home, right now they have access. So you would expect and assume that only they have access, but there are so many other people within the campus, like who are accessing within the facility, who are accessing, who have access to this data. Let's say like you are not timing out, or like you don't have proper timeout parameters set on your laptops, right? And then like what happens, like anybody who is just walking by, like they have access to your company's network, right? So that is kind of the number one risk that we see, especially in this COVID economy. And then the second one is access management. So this has been happening over a period of time as companies are migrating from on-premise services to more cloud-based services, right? So you have someone like who has got administrative privilege, you give them access to your Gmail administrator account and whatnot. So he has got pretty much everything to it. And then like you terminate this particular person, and then like you forget to terminate them from some of these key cloud-based systems or whatnot. And that means that you're opening up a huge can of worms, and it opens up like a big liability also for your company. Although you've terminated this person, he still has access to your data and your customers' data. And that's number two. And number three is it's a little bit more along, more aligns with the topic that we are going to be, Todd and Nilin is going to be talking about today, which is giving a big picture to the information security team and the executive team in terms of where are the vulnerabilities and what is the risk that I am exposed to due to these vulnerabilities, and how we are tracking them, and have they all been being managed effectively, what kind of priorities we are setting, and what kind of work in process we have to fix this vulnerability, whether we are going to be upgrading certain systems which are end of life, or like are we going to be patching the systems that for the vulnerabilities widely known on the internet, like in terms of how to hack this particular system. So those three, in our opinion, based on our experience in the field work, right, that's what we see are like the key things that people need to be considering, especially when it comes to vulnerability management.
Great. I think, yeah, I completely agree with all of them. Todd, do you have any other things that you can think of in terms of major security issues or challenges that you can think of other than these?
That question is for me or Todd?
Oh, it's for Todd.
Raj, thank you. The things that I think about, I'll write on Srini's coattails here for a moment about the near wholesale shift to remote work as a result of this COVID environment. And the thing that I think about in that, obviously, people are not coming to the campus. They're not working now within your protected domain. And so what the IT organization is being confronted with is just an exponentially larger degree of complexity relative to endpoint connectivity, and then also security of those endpoints. As Srini mentioned, the antivirus protection, access protections on those endpoints that now the organization may or may not have control over. So I think about just the complexity of now, how do you manage from a vulnerability standpoint? How do you manage all those endpoints that may or may not be corporate assets? The second thing that I think about there is where organizations are from their ability to really get the work done of IT with the budgetary pressures that have to be resulting from organizations missing revenue targets as a byproduct of the slowdown of this economic environment that we're in. That has to be shifting project priorities. And in those shifting project priorities, you're likely losing manpower, you're likely losing man hours to high priority things. And so often that can lead to security organizations, which are not revenue producing organizations, they're more revenue protecting organizations. That can put those organizations, those teams, in a position where they are actually treading water technically, and they're not really able to address the priorities in their work queues because simply they've got reduced man hours and they've got an increase in complexity that they're trying to deal with. So it's that it creates this perfect storm for the security operations and compliance organizations in that, I've got reductions and I've got higher complexity. So it's just a real challenge for security operations and compliance organizations to meet the challenges of these days.
Awesome. Thank you, Todd, for that. So now that we know, why vulnerability is important and what are these challenges. So Nilin, maybe Nilin, I will start with you, right? How are the organizations addressing this vulnerability management coming from the IT perspective?
Thank you, Raj. And Todd did kind of make a couple of very good points overall. For organizations to be successful at managing vulnerabilities, they're all going to be working with constraints. And it's constraints in terms of budget, it's constraints in terms of resources. To work with these constraints and still be successful at managing vulnerabilities, many of the mature organizations have a vulnerability program or a vulnerability management program that encompasses all the different systems that are there in the enterprise. And the key components of this particular program are going to be kind of the different phases that are involved in this. So organizations kind of take the first step at assessing all their assets and seeking out where the vulnerabilities exist. So they need to do the scan of all their assets and make sure that they get a bigger picture of which of them are vulnerable to exploits. Once you get an overall picture, everything needs to be prioritized. Since we are working with constraints, the organizations do not really have the luxury to work on or fix all the vulnerabilities at the same time. So prioritization is very important, and this is based on the kind of the level of the threat, the exposure kind of to the systems, and the impact that vulnerability is going to have if it was exploited. Based on these priorities, organizations develop an action plan which forms 3 phases. You could end up with a complete remediation, which means you're eliminating the vulnerability altogether. You could end up with a short-term fix, which basically reduces the vulnerability in the near term, and you would still kind of get that additional time to kind of find a longer-term solution. Or at times, for some of the vulnerabilities, you may choose to do nothing. And that's again based on the prioritization. You may take into account any of these action items. Once you mitigate or remediate, then you need to do a rescan and then validate that the vulnerabilities that are reported are all fixed, or at least they're minimized. And this is a continuous cycle. So there's really kind of no end point here. You continue to improve upon the processes that you have put in place. And you actually have the organizations also evolve metrics or generate metrics along the way that help kind of identify what the SLAs should be for responding to the vulnerabilities that are identified. So this is basically the process that many organizations actually follow. And I'll turn it over to Srini to take this and kind of share his views on this.
Yeah, thanks, Nilin. I think this is an excellent diagram that kind of explains generally what are like the important key steps that people need to consider when they are thinking about implementing a solid and comprehensive vulnerability management, right? So I don't want to repeat what you mentioned, but some of the most important things, Raj, what I think is, the coverage of the assets, right? So no matter what, if you are starting off with a good vulnerability management, you need to know what you want to protect, right? If you don't know that, then no matter how good of a program you have, and so the asset coverage, that's the most important part in my opinion. But for example, right? So many of your customers are migrating away from traditional ITSRs to modern, like all the cloud-based, the containers and the web apps, or maybe some kind of public cloud, and all these assets, right? So making sure that you identify all these asserts based on where the data that we initially talked about is all stored. I think that is going to be the most important step, right? Um, so that is step number one, in my opinion. So if you do a good job with that, the problem that's well defined, that's like pretty much 50% solved, right? And then the second thing is about the approach. So I know Nilin talked a little bit about the overall process and stuff. Whereas, like, if you're talking about the tools, vulnerability management tool, which we probably will get into a little bit more in detail later, right, Raj, in terms of what kind of different tools available for people to
Right.
look at. Okay. Yeah. So essentially, the approach is whether do you want to be doing active scanning using some scanner and agents, or like you want to do passive type of scanning, right? Like the continuous scanning and just then report it, right? So again, like when you do some of the scanning, you can additionally enforce certain actions and things, and even prevent certain things to happen, right? So those are like some of the approach that you have to consider, like what kind of vulnerability scanning approach that you want to take. Whether you want to start off with like the code scanning, like even where, let's say you're a software company, you're developing code software, and you want to start off with DevOps code scanning even to begin with, right? Whether all your code like that you're developing and deploying is all secure and stuff. Or like you can also probably, you will have to be thinking about some of the more non-intrusive, like device monitoring and other type of thing. So there are like different things within the scanning part that you need to be considering before coming up with an approach. And then the couple of other important things when it comes to the approach. One is, the configuration checks for all your, say, for example, you're running VMs, you're running Linux-based servers and stuff. So there are already a lot of pre-imaged, pre-configured hardened systems that are available. Say, for example, Center for Internet Security, they have hardened images available. You could purchase that from AWS, or you could purchase it from Azure, instead of trying to build something and then trying to harden it and stuff. So that means essentially you are getting rid of all the known vulnerabilities that are already published by these vendors. So that is another thing, that configuration checks and other type of things that you want to do with respect to vulnerability management. That is something you need to keep that in mind. And also now with all this artificial intelligence, the machine learning and stuff, there is a lot of threat intelligence already available. Who's using what kind of methods to attack a particular company, attack a particular industry, right? When it comes to healthcare, or like whether it comes to financial market and stuff, how they are approaching with respect to attacking the company. And then like you come up with all these different tools that will be essentially kind of meet all these needs, right? That is from the approach side. And then I'll finish it very quickly, Raj. I know, like we are running out of time. There's a third part, the most important part. I think, like hopefully Nilin and others will have more time to discuss about your a tool that helps with ServiceNow automation. The automation part is very, very important. So you have a lot of these vulnerabilities available now. Like you can pretty much, install Kali Linux or like any of this vulnerability management tool. They are time a dozen these days, right? So you can identify the vulnerabilities, but how are you going to be? That's why it's called vulnerability management. How are you going to be managing it? Is this a right vulnerability that you need to be even focusing on at this point in time? And is it prioritized properly? And then is it being reported to your information security team or the operations team to fix it on time? So those are the remediation side of things. That's again a very important thing. And lastly, I would say the management and reporting part, right? That's very, very important, which a lot of these tools lack. A lot of the tools that you see in the market, they don't have a very good reporting system in terms of um, your asset functionalities and your asset overview, and where are your vulnerabilities and how you are particularly exposed, and what is what is your relative risk exposure type of things, right? Kind of a dashboard or the reporting and up to date status on where you stand and stuff. So those are like some of the things that I would say overall in the program that you need to be considering if you are seriously thinking about having a very comprehensive and sophisticated vulnerability management. Does it make sense, Raj?
Yes, Srini, for sure. I think thank you for the extensive details there. I think it kind of gives us a big picture, and also some of the loopholes or I would say the challenges with the existing tool sets there. Why we see. So it does make a lot of sense. So a quick time check. We are halfway through here. So I want to just take 10 seconds for a quick poll from the audience and see just you can select one of them and just how do you handle vulnerability responses in your environment, right? So do you create items in your code, Azure DevOps, or is it automated? So just provide your responses that will help us understand exactly how are you managing that today, right? Awesome. Okay. So with that, I think I will. So thank you, Srini. I think thanks for the details. I would like to turn this over to Todd now a little bit to understand how is ServiceNow helping us in addressing some of these challenges in organizations, because I know ServiceNow is a huge player right now in overall marketplace in terms of project management processes, right? So I just want to focus, Todd, any thoughts there? How ServiceNow could help us?
Right, thanks. Great comments, Srini. I'm going to leapfrog on some of those here in just a moment as I talk. But what I've seen in the marketplace as ServiceNow implementations, as you guys can anticipate, I've seen organizations that have done some pretty interesting things from, wow, did you really do that? And I've seen some other organizations do some amazingly creative and innovative things to address these challenges. What I'm going to do is try to highlight a number of those themes that I've seen and have drawn from customers and projects that I'd slide down on that success end of the scale. But before I do that, I want to ride on Srini's and Lean's coattails there a little bit, and echoing the fact that I think two of the most important first steps in this process is developing a broad and detailed knowledge and understanding of your problem domain, followed very closely by a mature process design and definition. And that's driven from a posture founded in the reality that a great tool cannot fix a bad process. It can only ever amplify its flaws. So with that disclaimer, let me get into those highlights and those themes as we look at how can ServiceNow really help address these challenges in this space. And the first theme that I'll draw attention to is a foundational element, and that's data. Access to data. ServiceNow provides multitude of ways to integrate and import data from just about any source or repository that you can think of that's a modern tool. I'll say there are probably some out there that do not have integration capabilities to get into ServiceNow. But I will give that theme there with a little bit of a caveat. Access to data does not in any way infer the completeness of nor the accuracy of that data. As we all know, the limitations of scanners and discovery technologies, they can only capture data that are configured to be discovered. And there, while many data elements and attributes on CIs that are not discoverable and yet still important, possibly even critical to the remediation work of resolving vulnerabilities within the environment. The second point there will be ServiceNow's ability to enrich by classification and categorization mechanisms of that data or attributes on specific data elements that you're coming in with. ServiceNow has many ways to classify, categorize, prioritize data in order to transform it into something with greater clarity of meaning. That meaning transforming it into information, whether that be the work records or the data records, where you can actually be informed and that data be useful and actionable. The third point there, so we've got access to the data, we've got the classification and enrichment of that data. The third point on the data is the presentation of that data. ServiceNow has many ways to present that data, where it be in the forms and list views and summary or detail layers in reports or dashboards, etc. All of those having the inherent ability to be tailored to a specific audience in ways that facilitate that or those audiences to assimilate the data and in so make informed decisions that are required of their organizational level. So practitioners, managers, directors, VPs, executives, etc., get the information presented in a manner appropriate to their needs and the actions and decisions that they need to make. These are all statements that can be summarized in what has been ServiceNow's consistent theme for a decade and a half: consolidation, visualization, and consumerization. Now, that might sound a bit old school to some of you who've been around ServiceNow for a while, but the focus there has been and is on gathering the appropriate data, enriching it by contextualizing it so it turns into useful and actionable information, as we mentioned before, appropriate and necessary for the many consumer audiences that will interact with that data. Now, along with data, another theme would be workflows and automation, the use of multiple dimension matrices and leveraging other related record types. Regards to workflows, I often look at these as the ushers within the system. Ushers in the sense that they guide the records and the users, the practitioners, through the life cycle of specific records. In the case of our conversation today, the life cycle of the individual vulnerability records and those related records that we're going to talk about here in a moment. Also included here are the automations. The use of various automation mechanisms within ServiceNow is really a hallmark to the most successful customers and projects. But I'll specifically highlight and encourage automation in the deployment and remediation activities in the form of scripts, in the form of the use of orchestration, etc. Where I see a high number of delinquent vulnerabilities in an organization, they are almost inevitably linked to teams or systems that demand to have their remediation tasks done manually for a myriad of reasons, for a myriad of justifications, but they demand to do their remediation manually. Here, I would encourage, make the best use of your investment in ServiceNow, automate the things that you can automate and get them done so that you can focus on the things that build your organization, that build your IT environments. Another thing in the automation space that are not necessarily code-based, but prioritization matrix or matrices within ServiceNow, either single dimension or multi-dimension matrices, can eliminate some manual steps that the security analysts or even the IT folks have to work through in evaluating, determining, and assigning the appropriate priority to each record. And as we know, manual steps characterized by variations, by inconsistencies, and by error-prone human activity. And so if we can use matrices, then we drive out those things that introduce inconsistencies, lack of repeatability, repeatable results, and those errors that can be introduced as a result of the human factor. Now, the related records type, the first thing that comes to mind there are the use of service level agreements. I've seen SLAs as well as OLAs add a tremendous value in this context by having preset expectations defined and communicated that can drive that prioritization in alignment with the desires and needs of the business. I've also seen customers use the incidents for CI and change requests for CIs to help identify the opportunities to include specific vulnerability remediation activities and for the purpose of accountability to ensure those remediation activities are taking place at the earliest possible opportunity. So you include those related records on the list of a related list within your vulnerability record so that you can see, we've got a change request coming up that's going to take the system down. What a better opportunity to go ahead and do your vulnerability remediation. Does that make sense, Raj?
Yes, Todd. So I do see there is, in spite of using ServiceNow and similar tools in the market, I think I do get a sense of where some of these gaps are in terms of why we are still having these compliance issues, right? I think you mentioned lack of proper prioritization, lack of automation, maybe. What are the other gaps, right? That are, in spite of using these tools like ServiceNow, people are still facing the compliance issues. So are there any specific gaps other than these that you would like to point out, Todd?
Yeah, I think there are some challenges, and that'll be a little bit of a replay of those points that I've just brought out, the data, the presentation, and the automation pieces that really successful customers and projects exercise challenges to organizations who aren't leveraging ServiceNow to its fullest. It's going to be just kind of a replay of that from a didn't do or a don't have aspect. So we'll just work through that. So in the data, as I alluded to earlier, access to it doesn't always ensure or infer the completeness of or the accuracy of. So you have data inaccuracies and incomplete sources. These issues seem to precipitate out through the execution, but really need to have their own remediation processes in place to clean and scrub that data so that you get sources that are clean, that are complete, that you can really base your decisions and your remediation activities on. The second aspect there, so data first, the second aspect there are processes. Relative to data, particularly data scrubbing, data cleaning processes, oftentimes that is in the technology environments that I've been exposed to are one of the least attended to processes in the organization. So you get unclean data, and then you get into processes that are ineffective. Ineffective processes waste resource and man hours because they do not produce the desired outcomes. Inefficient processes waste resources and man hours because they do not apply lean thinking to executing only the tasks or steps necessary to produce the target outcome. They have a tendency to involve too many people and too many convoluted steps in trying to produce the outcome that they target. Simplified processes are elegant, effective, and efficient. They take the necessary inputs and transform them into the required outputs in the fewest steps possible, and this, the demand of the fewest resources. Processes are the definition of your solution domain and are the solution statement. Technology is not the solution. It is simply an enabler to your process.
Well said.
The next would be the presentation of data. If data is being presented in forms that does not inform, that does not educate, that does not enable its consumer to act in a more informed and educated manner, it's bad presentation. UX wizardry is good to increase engagement, but if it doesn't communicate well, if it doesn't meet the objectives of communication, that being to inform, educate, and change behavior, it's bad presentation. The next thing that would be a challenge would be not leveraging the automation opportunities that you have within ServiceNow. As you can assume my posture, I would encourage you leverage automation everywhere it makes sense in your environment. Automation allows you to relegate the mundane, repetitive, and often error-prone activities to the system and redirect your human resources to focus on activities where their thinking, reasoning, and creativity are required and can be engaged. Plus, it gets those mundane and repetitive activities like vulnerability remediations done more quickly and repeatedly.
Thank you, Todd.
I think the biggest gap in the IT organization rise is the fact that it is assumed by ServiceNow, it is assumed that everyone in IT will have a log on to ServiceNow and that ServiceNow will play a part in their everyday work activity. That's not the case. So being that you have work groups, teams that are actively doing things that are engaged in this software development process, in the management of the environments and infrastructure, that never log into ServiceNow because that's not their primary tool in which they do their work assignment and work management. So that's a huge gap for some of these organizations where it's only the ITSM folks, the incident, change, configuration, asset management folks, they get these logins. And so those other teams are deprived of the information that is housed in ServiceNow. So that's a huge gap. And that's where, I appreciate the work that KANINI has done in developing the KVID360 tool and the dashboards that it gives to inform those work groups, and not only those work groups, but also the folks that live in ServiceNow. So those are just the vulnerabilities that I would identify right now in the marketplace relative to using ServiceNow around this domain space.
Great. Thank you, Todd. Thanks for the insights there. So you did mention about KVID360, so I would turn this over to Nilin now. Nilin, can you explain to us a little bit about how KANINI helped solve some of these challenges using the KVID360 solution? So what exactly is the solution? Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure, Raj. And thank you, Todd, for kind of highlighting one of the important aspects in terms of a gap that is out there. So though ServiceNow now handles the consolidation, visualization, and the consumerization aspects well, it is in practical situations, the different stakeholders or the different teams actually still end up using different tools. Mm-hmm. And with KVID360, one of the goals or one of the things that we have been able to address is to be able to connect these tools. So connect a vulnerability scanner with the Azure DevOps tool that the development team uses in order to provide information to the teams that are fixing the issues in a timely manner, and also in process remove the key barrier to adoption, which is basically any manual steps that are added to the process result in basically resistance to kind of the acceptance. So in a typical scenario, what happens is the addition of the vulnerability scans and also kind of the consolidation and creation of the reports is a manual activity. So with the KVID360, one of the things that we address effectively is the automation piece and the ability to link the whole the development teams and also the different PMO teams that actually look at vulnerabilities across the different applications. So this tool specifically addresses the challenges within the scope of application development and the different stakeholders that are involved in this whole process. So I'll take you through a short demo of the features of KVID360 to help better understand how the tool effectively solves these challenges. Right. So at the start of the process, it's the development team that's actually starting to write some code. When they write the code and they actually put that into the source control or the Azure DevOps systems, those are usually configured in a manner that when some code is checked in, a build pipeline runs as part of the continuous integration process. When we talk about a pipeline, it's basically a series of steps that execute sequentially, right? And as part of the pipeline execution, if we see here, one of the steps is actually related to the code analysis. So this is where Azure DevOps kind of integrates with SonarQube, one of our vulnerability scanners, and all the code that is checked in by the development team gets scanned, and a report of all the vulnerabilities is actually created at the end of the code analysis, right? So when the scan is actually completed, the from a KVID360 perspective, a notification is actually sent to ServiceNow, and this leads to ServiceNow pulling in all the information that is out there that has been generated by the scanner, by the SonarQube scan, into a temporary or a holding table, which we call as the transformation table. And the data that gets pulled in as part of the data, it is possible to identify the scanners that was used, the type of the issues that have been reported, and also the severity of all the identified issues. So that is the consolidation that we see. And this is again without any manual intervention. All that the development team has done yet is just kind of change the check in their code. Right? So from Azure DevOps to the ServiceNow transformation table, we can identify uh, based on the data that we've got, what are the different types of issues that are there, and out of that, which issues should be actually created as vulnerability items in ServiceNow. And to Todd's point earlier, right, the reason we have built this solution leveraging the vulnerability module of ServiceNow is that it basically provides us a built-in functionality to manage all of these information that we get from the different scanners, and it helps us get a consolidated view that someone can look at it at an organization level across applications. Right? Now, based on the coming back to the issue type, so based on the vulnerability issues that we have, the KV360 tool can be configured to ensure that only vulnerability items that match the rules that have been configured are created in ServiceNow, right? So here is an example of a rule that is configured, wherein we talk about the issue type that is not a code smell, vulnerabilities that are in the status that is open, and vulnerabilities that are actually where the severity is major, minor, or critical. So any data that we've got imported from SonarQube into the ServiceNow, if it matches the rule, a vulnerability item is also created in ServiceNow. Okay? If you look at all the data that is captured in from the SonarQube scanner, so we can see that we have the source files, the line numbers, the project where it is captured from, and also the date and time where it was created and when it was actually last updated. Right? The same information is also kind of carried forward when we are creating a vulnerability ticket, a vulnerability record in ServiceNow. So we have the source, we have the risk source, and we also have the risk rating. So this information is actually used to determine when we are creating a work item in the Azure DevOps, what is the type of item and what is the priority or severity of that item that needs to be created. Right? All of these work items, the vulnerability items are created against a specific configuration item or an application that has been identified. Right? And if the configuration item does not exist, it is created as a part of this process. When we resolve a specific item, we can also go out and add some notes to the system, right? So any notes that we add as part of the resolutions get created as knowledge base articles that can actually be further used the next time we see a vulnerability item that matches the specific uh, kind of item that we have seen before. Okay. We find the KV article, we attach it as part of the vulnerability item, and all of these information effectively also gets transferred into Azure DevOps, which is the system of choice for the development teams. So for the development team, there is visibility if we go back into Azure DevOps, and from the vulnerability item that is created in ServiceNow, an incident type of work item is created in the Azure DevOps for the development teams to see and prioritize. And if you look at it, all the details that we had captured that seamlessly flow through from one system into another. So from ServiceNow, we mapped the priority based on the risk rating that we have identified. We also have a link to the knowledge base article that was all kind of that helps the development team resolve these issues. And given this fact, basically all this helps the development team kind of go and fix the issues faster, effectively helping them meet the SLAs that may be already kind of in place or identified for fixing the different types of the vulnerability issues. Okay? And as and when the development team actually fixes the items, the same process repeats all over again. When the fix is put in place, SonarQube, the vulnerability scanner is kind of does the code analysis again, and items that have been resolved are marked as fixed in SonarQube. That same data then flows back into ServiceNow, where the vulnerability item gets marked as closed, and it flows from here back into the Azure DevOps also, where that particular work item is actually closed. Right? So with this, what we are seeing is that without any manual intervention in place, KV360 basically enables the flow of information through all the systems which are now connected, And this enables the development teams to prioritize and fix the issues faster, leading to closure of these vulnerabilities in a more timely manner. Okay? So that is really kind of the space that KVID360 works in, and that's the key advantage that it actually provides to all the different stakeholders involved in the application development. Okay?
Thanks.
We
So
yes,
where
good.
can where do users get this? Like where can they download or purchase this?
Okay, so before I kind of get into where the users come in, I would also like to highlight one aspect of this. So when we implemented this with one of the organizations that we work with, we did see that it resulted in a productivity increase by 15 to 20%. And this results in the time saving with the automated approach. It eliminates the need to enter all of these data manually and track it. And also the consolidated view across applications, across all the different types of issues, it provides kind of a visibility at an organization level into what uh, vulnerabilities are still open and still needs to be addressed. So that is really kind of the benefit that we get when someone goes ahead and implements KV360. Okay. And coming back to your question, Raj, so where can someone download this tool from, or where can they find this? So the tool is available on the ServiceNow App Store. Just need to go log into the ServiceNow App Store and search for KVID360. You come to this page, which is being shown here. And with that, you also have the complete installation guides and the configuration guides. And once you set this up, you are ready to go, and you can reap the benefits of the automation and the consolidated view that the KV360 tool enables.
Thank you, Nilin. Thanks for the update. I think we are at the top of the hour, and thank you, Todd. Thank you, Srini. Thank you, Nilin, for your thoughts here. I'm quickly checking if there are any Q&A questions here, which I do not see. So is there any final thoughts on any new tools or any new hacks or products that organizations are bringing to address the challenge? Any final thoughts there, Todd or Srini?
No, I think definitely, I think this will be a really useful one for a lot of the development shops, right, who are trying to really get a good handle on managing their vulnerabilities and stuff. So I think definitely I see a lot of use cases, especially, log management is a big deal. Analyzing logs and then being able to track those individual items from the logs, and a lot of the other tools, which are generating these huge humongous logs, and how to be able to make sense out of it. I think I see a lot of opportunities in that space as well.
Thank you, Srini.
I would agree with Srini. I think the space in which this tool sits really closes that gap that we talked about earlier, because I think ServiceNow has set up from the standpoint of
Hey Wesley, how are you?
the infrastructure
Very good,
organization
very good, Wes.
address these vulnerabilities within the infrastructure environment, whereas the ServiceNow is really continuing to grow in that that domain of really supporting and enabling development organizations work within their IDE environments, work within their cloud environments, whether that's Azure or AWS, et cetera. So I think this really fits into a niche that identifies a ServiceNow area of growth, and will really serve a lot of folks well in leveraging ServiceNow where its strengths are, but then also leveraging the tool sets that they work in on a daily basis. to manage, assign, and track their work as well.
Thank you, Todd. I think that's all we have for today. Thank you again, Todd, Srini, and Nilin for your thoughts. If there are any questions, please write to us at transformations@kanini.com. And thank you for all those who have joined us today as well. Thank you. Look forward for an ebook from us. For those of you who have joined, you should get it in your mail shortly. Thank you.
Thanks, Raj.